Perspective drawing in Illustrator opens up a completely new way of creating things. Although it might look like 3D, but it is actually more like 2.5D, because you won't be able to rotate objects in 3D space, like you can do with the 3D effects, or when grid tool. Once that's selected, we get the perspective grid visible, and here are a couple of control points that we can use to change the perspective. Most importantly, you have your horizon line, which you can adjust, so you can drag it up or drag it down. A perspective illustration and more similar to isometric view. If you want to see more of the mesh or this grid, you can of course increase it, so that can help you to imagine how your drawing is going to look like. And the same applies to this top point here as well. So if you would like to see more in a vertical line from the mesh, you can just drag that point up. Notice that we have another little indicator here on the top left, with which we can switch between the planes, and we can select them also by using shortcuts. If I press 1, that's the left grid. Number 2 is the ground or horizontal grid, which is the green one. And then if I press 3, that will be the orange or right grid. So let me keep the right one selected, and then I'm going to use the rectangle tool and just simply draw a rectangle. I'm going to change the fill color to be red, and the outline I'm just going to remove it, so no stroke and red fill. So that's how the object looks in the plane and the perspective that we have here. And here's immediately a useful thing to remember. If you want to move this object around but still keep it in perspective, make sure you don't use the selection tool, because that won't take it into consideration that it's in perspective, so it will just simply keep it the way it was, but it completely forgets that it is in perspective. Instead, use this other tool called perspective selection tool. When that is selected, I can keep moving this object, and as you can see, it will recognize where it is within this grid that I have selected. I can even go beyond it, of course, or further in the background. It will always remember the perspective of this grid. Let me just move this further down, somewhere around here. And I am going to draw now on the left grid, so I'm going to press 1 and then use the rectangle tool. I'm going to start drawing here and then go around there. I will change the color of this to something a bit different, maybe orange. And once again, if I want to scale it or change the position of it, I would use the perspective selection tool. And then I'm going to switch to the last grid that we need, which is the horizontal one. So I press number 2 on the keyboard, and I used the rectangle tool now again, and I draw the top part of this box. And once again, I'm going to change the color. So if I want to now see the object without these guidelines, I can use another shortcut. Command or Control Shift I will hide the perspective grid. And I can also click somewhere outside. So although we are not creating a three-dimensional object, thanks to the perspective grid, we managed to create something that is very believable to be in a three-dimensional space. When I press the Command or Control Shift I again, I get the perspective grid back. And what I'm going to do now is another interesting technique, pushing an already existing shape away from the current position, so it will move parallel to its plane. And the way you do that is once again using the same perspective selection tool, but you have to hold down the number 5 on the keyboard and then start click and dragging the object. So you can see it actually moves back or to the front parallel to the original position, and that way I can move this object somewhere here and then right click, arrange, send to back, will send it behind. So let's select this other face, the red one, and notice that when I switch between objects, Illustrator automatically recognizes which grid the current object is based on. So having the red face selected, we are on the orange grid. And now I'm going to copy this object. So I will use Command or Control C and then Command or Control F. That's a quick way to duplicate and keep it in the same position. Then I would like to push this one further back. By holding down 5, I can push it all the way where the end of the object is. And then last but not least, I'm going to select the top face and I duplicate this again. So Command or Control C and then F. And then holding down 5, I will push it all the way to the bottom. So now if I hide the grid, we can see again our view of this object without the guidelines. And finally, we can add strokes. So I'm going to use black outline and we on. I can select the type tool and click, then type in something like 3D text, make it slightly bigger. And if I want to put this into perspective, what I need to do is to use the perspective selection tool. Once I start moving the text, you see immediately that it's going stayed in that same grid or plane, but now we change the text. So if perspective drawing is something you would like to try out, I could suggest to draw maybe a street or just a building or simple objects like a chair or a table. And when you're done, you can move on to the next chapter where we will look at Illustrator's export options and integration with other Adobe applications.